Think you could survive as a medieval archer? Not just survive battle, survive the training. Because life as a longbowman wasn't glamorous. It was punishing, grueling, thankless, and designed to break you before the battlefield even got the chance. Becoming an archer wasn't a choice. It was a sentence. If you were a boy in medieval England, your fate was sealed the moment you could stand. Archery wasn't encouraged, it was legally required. Kings didn't ask politely, they passed laws. Every able-bodied male between 7 and 60 had to train with a longbow after church every Sunday. Miss practice, enjoy your fine, or a stint in the stocks. Imagine being 10 years old, handed a bow taller than you, and told to draw it. Again and again. Not 10 times, hundreds. Until your fingers bled, your shoulders screamed, and you learned crying wouldn't stop the orders. You didn't get sympathy, you got repetition, and this wasn't some toy bow. By your teens, you were expected to handle the real thing. A yew longbow that required over 100 pounds of force to draw. To even reach that level, boys trained like human siege weapons, lifting stones, pulling weights, repeating the same movements thousands of times. It reshaped their bones. Literally. Archaeologists have found longbowmen with grotesquely altered skeletons, oversized left arms, warped spines, thickened bones, and deformed fingers. Some had grooves worn into their fingertips from endless string pressure. Their bodies were permanently marked by their weapon. By age 16, the best could fire 10 to 12 arrows a minute at deadly ranges. Their calluses were so thick, a needle wouldn't pierce the skin. Good thing, too, because medieval medicine was less treatment and more try not to die, and that was just to earn the bow. Using it was another ordeal. The English longbow was a masterpiece of war, yes, but also a machine of suffering. Drawing it was like lifting a 90-pound weight with 3 fingers, not once, but over and over. For hours, the longbow demanded everything. Archers maintained their gear obsessively. Strings made of hemp or flax had to be waxed constantly and kept dry at all costs. Many archers carried spares, sometimes in creative hiding places. When it came to staying alive, modesty didn't matter. Arrows weren't one size fits all either. They had to be matched precisely to your bow. Too heavy, and they flew like bricks. Too light, and they lacked power. Archers knew their gear the way a sniper knows a rifle. Daily practice was expected. Miss a session? That was grounds for punishment. Some archers even joked their bows were like wives, demanding constant care, causing constant pain, and still expecting absolute loyalty. One was caught drunk on duty and said he needed ale just to recover from what the bow took out of him during the day. And then came the real fun, marching to war. The longbow alone was 6 feet of awkward weight, but that was just the beginning. Archers carried 60 to 100 arrows, another 7 to 12 pounds, stuffed into belts, boots, or shoved into the ground for easy grabbing. They hauled spare feathers, shafts, arrowheads, and emergency fletching kits. Because what's better than battlefield arts and crafts? Rain, your worst enemy. Wet strings stretched and failed. That's why archers carried multiple spares, wrapped and hidden anywhere they could fit. Then came armor, if you could call it that. Most wore padded gambesons that weighed 10 to 15 pounds and felt like soggy mattresses. Some had mail shirts, another 20 pounds. Helmets added 3 to 5. Throw in a buckler, maybe a hand axe or dagger, and suddenly you're dragging the weight of a small teenager into battle. Altogether, archers carried 60 to 80 pounds of gear, and they still had to run, shoot, survive. And when the arrows ran out, you improvised. Some archers turned their bows into staves, adding metal tips to the ends or swinging them like clubs. Medieval illustrations show desperate bowmen parrying swords with their bows or tripping horses. It rarely ended well. Up close, knights were trained killers in steel armor. Archers were distance assassins with sticks. If you survived the melee, the next stop was the medic. And by medic, we mean a man with wine, a glowing iron, and no pain relief. Arrow extractions involved tools like the crow's beak, designed to yank embedded arrowheads from your flesh. Melee wounds often meant shattered bones, rotting flesh, and one solution, amputation. Wounds were stitched with horsehair or boar bristles. Infection was rampant. Disinfectant? Pour wine into the cut and pray. Some doctors still believe bad smells cause disease. Treatments range from useful, like honey, to horrifying, like smearing on animal dung. And if you couldn't pull a bow after your injury, you were out. No pension, no support. Many archers maim themselves on purpose, cutting off fingers to avoid being drafted again. When self-mutilation is your best career move, you know the job is broken. And speaking of pay, don't expect much. A skilled archer earned about 6 pence per day, barely more than a farm laborer. It was enough for a couple of ales or a basic meal, but not a future. Wages were often delayed for weeks or never paid at all. That's why so many archers turned to looting. It wasn't legal, it was survival. One night's armor could be worth months of wages. Even a good pair of boots or a warhorse was like hitting the jackpot. If no enemies were left, civilians were an easy target. In peacetime, things got worse. Archers were unpaid but still expected to maintain weapons and skills. Many took side jobs, blacksmithing, farming, or entering archery tournaments with tiny prizes. If they were injured, too bad. Lose a hand and you might get a few shillings in compensation, barely enough for a funeral. A few were granted land by grateful lords, but most ended up among the poorest in their towns. Crippled veterans scraping by. Some became instructors, most faded into poverty. Even in death, many were buried in unmarked graves. Forgotten. The same hands that once turned the tide of war couldn't afford a wooden cross. Worse still, society didn't know where to place them. Too important to ignore. Too common to respect. Nobles looked down on them. Chronicles written by aristocrats called them vulgar and crude. The church condemned them, labeling bows and crossbows as unholy weapons. Papal decrees cast archers in a spiritual limbo, praised by kings, damned by priests. Even their communities were torn. Kids saw them as heroes. Parents saw them as a warning. Some towns passed laws to keep archers from causing trouble after returning from war. So, still think you could be a medieval archer? If you do, congrats. You've got more grit than half the knights who ever wore a crown. Because behind every glorious victory was an archer with broken fingers, twisted bones, and a war that never really ended. And yet some carried a sense of pride. Despite everything, archers were a brotherhood forged in adversity. They were celebrated in ballads, their tales whispered to children as bedtime stories. To some, they became the embodiment of resilience. Even today, the legend of the medieval longbowmen lives on, etched into the culture of heroism and relentless spirit. We remember their sacrifices, for they changed the course of history with every shot. Their legacy remains a testament to the human will to endure,